Good morning, YouTube. ChickenBrad here. I wanted to present to you my second ever USCF rated tournament game. And this game came about, it was actually played on the same day almost immediately after my first game. And the reason for that was my opponent Jared wasn't going to make one of the following weeks, and he asked the tournament director if it was possible to play his game at a different time. And since we'd both won our games, I suggested that, if he had time, if there's no problem with it, why didn't we just play our round two immediately, since we'd probably have to face off anyway. And the tournament director allowed it, so we had one game after another, and I was able to watch the end of his first game, since mine ended about 10 minutes earlier. And although I could tell he had a little more fundamental knowledge than my first opponent, and would generally spend a little more time studying, a little more experience, he still had quite a few inaccuracies, and I felt that I could have an advantage. So I suppose there was selfish reasons for wanting to play the game immediately. I thought I could probably pick up an easy second win on my first tournament. So I should mention before we start off the video that Jared was 12 years old, a little bit older than my first opponent, and interestingly enough, I drew both of the minors in the tournament. Everyone else was considerably older, just kind of the way it worked out. And this was also his first USCF tournament, so we had both had only one game prior, tournament game, and we'd both won that game, so this would be our second ever game for each of us. So I decided to play a fairly aggressive opening. I played actually the Danish Gambit, or I attempted to anyway. We'll see that. But this opening, so it starts with e4, and I just want to mention that I haven't had a lot of success playing this opening. I don't think I've had very many wins at all in my blitz games, and that's generally not a good sign. You want to be playing it in longer games either. However, like I said, I kind of wanted to play aggressively, and after he played e5, this was pretty much the most aggressive line I could think of, and I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to kind of save King's Gambit for a different round, kind of as a surprise weapon for a different opponent I'd play for. So here, d4. This is the center game. I should mention that. So, and this is one of the oldest openings played, but not played anymore really at a high level. He takes d4, and c3 signals the Danish Gambit. And there's a couple of different ways. I'm not going to go into the Danish Gambit lines, but generally, if black wants to accept the Danish Gambit, he'll capture the pawn here, and the main move, bishop out to c4, black captures again, and then bishop up. There, well, I'll just show you what it looks like. I'll do a new variation. And this is the Danish Gambit positions, black's moves here. And as you can see, I'm down 2 pawns. Black already has a passed pawn this early in the game, but this is very, very aggressive, and black immediately has to defend and try to trade off pieces in order to exploit this passed pawn and this material advantage he has. So going back, and also here, if oops, what's going on? D takes C. I can also capture here with the knight and play the half Danish, sacrificing 1 pawn instead of 2. But that's actually not the way this game goes. So here my opponent plays d5, and this is a standard opening move. It is theory, and I was actually a bit surprised by this. This is not something I've seen played very frequently at all. Like I said, it is theory, but in my encounters, this doesn't come up so much. So I was kind of interested to see what was going to happen here. And I did take a look at the Danish Gambit opening because I was planning on playing it against a couple different opponents if I got the opportunity, but I didn't spend a lot of time looking at it. And this move I knew that this move was possible here, with a fine game for black, but I didn't really look into it much because it's kind of a weird looking move. And after some thought, I did decide on playing queen takes d4, which, yes, it wins a tempo. which allows a winning of a tempo here with knight c6. But that's not really a great move because it actually loses a pawn for black. And when I was trying to play a gambit, it turns into black playing a gambit. So there's a lot of possibilities here for black. In a lot of ways, this game can go. Knight f6. Bishop's okay. This bishop coming out's okay. Actually, queen coming down to the e7 square is alright. But knight c6 is actually not really a recommended move here because it does lose a pawn immediately and it causes some problems for black. But that's what was played. Sensible looking move. And in most variations, actually, when queen takes pawn on d4, this knight c6 move is good. But in this situation, because it hangs a pawn, it's not so great. So here in this position, I spent a little bit of time. There was basically two moves I was considering. The first was playing bishop out here to the b5 square, which pins this knight and increases pressure on black's position. The second move I considered as, of course, just grabbing this pawn here, which was hanging. And the bishop move looked initially good, but unfortunately it gives black the opportunity to actually hold that pawn in some variations, because black may end up with double pawns, but the black's castling kingside if anything, but allows this bishop to come out along this diagonal, and black can hold fairly well. This double pawn isn't too much of a liability in this position. And finally I decided just on the simpler move, queen takes d5, for reasons mentioned before, because like I said, I'm sure to get a pawn in this position, and if black decides to exchange the queens, this knight has to move a second time. So it was certainly good, and it was unclear whether or not bishop b5 was going to be good or not. And after checking it and taking further analysis at home, queen takes d5 was better, and Rybka agreed. So queen takes d5, e takes d5, and knight e5. This is not the best square for the knight. There's another kind of just basic opening fundamental for new players. Unless there's a concrete reason to bring the knight out here, you're actually going to want to bring it to a different square. I mean, we have a couple options here. This square is not very good. Undeveloping is not very good. This square does block in the bishop, but it puts pressure on the e5 pawn from there. So, and this bishop can come out along this diagonal in some variations. Excuse me. So, arrow issues. There we go. So that's enough arrows for this position. So just keep that in mind, newer players. With this knight's not going to do any damage by itself. So knight to e5, it brings it to a central square, but there's no other developed pieces supporting it. So I can't recommend bringing it out here, because this just allows me to attack it now, and I do that with bishop f4. Black has to find a way to defend. The most solid way would be with this pawn push. Unfortunately, that opens up the f4 square and also makes it harder to develop this knight. So I believe the best move was chosen here, bishop d6, which does defend the knight, but the knight can still be attacked, and the drawback now is that's not the most active square for this dark squared bishop on the black side. Here I continue bishop b5 check, because there's no real great way to defend against this check. In the game, c6 was played, sacking a pawn, but all their variations, most of them keep the king in the center. And this is actually what I was thinking my opponent was going to play, bishop d7, and then after b takes e, notice this capture can't be made because then this rook is hanging. So bishop captures on e5. bishop takes d7, king to d7, and the after my next move, knight f3, this bishop has to move again, or a defensive move has to be made, and this position's just better for white. So that's what I was considering. The computer actually gives the best move, which I didn't consider, is king f8, and it looks a little bit awkward because now how is this rook going to get into the game? I guess eventually g3 or g7 is going to have g6 is going to have to be played, and the king's going to have to come out along here, which, like I said, isn't great for black. The pieces are cramped in, but it's probably the best defense as opposed to the king staying in the center anyway, and in pretty much all variations. So c6 was chosen as a defense, and this unfortunately is even worse for black. I missed out on a variation to win a rook here, and I'll show you what would have happened. So d takes c6, and the reason I didn't choose this move is because I didn't like the fact that after recaptures here, the knight would still be defending this pawn, and I thought that I would be forced to move this bishop away, or possibly tactically lose this bishop here, but that's actually not true. So bishop takes here, and now black has the choice of which way they want to recapture, but in either variation, a rook is being lost, because if captures here, we have b takes c6 check, and after something like this, the rook is lost, and the game is won for white. Otherwise, if going back, if c takes b5, bishop takes g6, and now this rook can't move, so it's just gone here. So unfortunately for me, I did miss those variations and instead played bishop takes e5 immediately. And after bishop takes e5, d takes c, my opponent played b6, which is, it prevents what I did from just happening, but it's not good. So I'm not sure what the best move for my opponent would have been in this situation. Probably maybe just moving the king. But the drawback with b6 is it gives me a passed pawn, which is not really in any danger of promoting at this point, but this is going to severely cramp in this light squared bishop, which in turn is going to make it hard to get this rook out. The king still hasn't castled. It's at least 2 moves away from that. And after I bring my knight out, it comes with tempo. So basically, I had the opportunity to pretty much complete my development while black was either going to complete his development or try and figure out how to deal with this pawn. He couldn't do both. So unfortunately, I thought I saw something better, and I thought I had a way I could win this rook. So I played c7, c7 check, which opens up a discover check with the bishop, but this bishop's easily parried with bishop d7, and after this move was played, I overlooked this move at all. I don't know how, but I was really upset after this. My c7 check move gets a question mark for sure, because I had gotten quite an advantage in the opening, and with this move I just completely gave it all back. Yes, white's going to be a little bit better, but this pawn's dropping for sure now. This also solves the problem of this tempo gain. It's just not good. So the best move I could find was b takes d7, bishop takes d7, which brings the king into the center. Knight f3, which, yes, it gains a tempo, but it also drops that pawn. So basically, the only thing I have in this position now is 1 extra pawn, and the king's in the center, but the queens are off, so that's not so bad. And black should be able to actually draw this position. So I was really pretty pretty upset looking at this position over the board, and I really spent a long time thinking, you know what, I am going to play the best moves from here on out. I'm not gonna do another, you know, give my positional advantage away like that. And I think I did fairly well. The computer agrees. So I wasn't sure if I was going to win it. You know, my prospects of I knew I was probably not losing, but my prospects of winning had gone way down. So I carried on here, castles, knight f6, and knight a3, and rook a to d8. And here, you know, like I said, I was spending quite a bit of time. I wanted to after every move, I wanted to see if there was any decisive threats. If not, I was going to just develop normally. And here I played knight b5, which doesn't really, it doesn't actually threaten anything. There's no forcing variations here for white to gain material at all, but this knight needs to be centralized anyway. It's no good on the a5 square, on the a3 square. And there are some opportunities for black to slip up. If this pawn advances, yes, I'll have a chance to pick up this bishop, or I can bring it in here. So I was actually anticipating this pawn push, because then I thought, well, I want the knight here anyway on this square, the d4 square. So this will basically just, if he does that, it'll kick the knight to a square I want it on anyway, and if not, he has to find a way to protect that. So I thought this move was good for white. He plays bishop b8, which removes the possibility of me capturing that bishop, and also protects. And here I thought I saw something. These pawns looked weakest, specifically the pawn here on g7, because it couldn't be moved, therefore not right away, so therefore it had to be defended by another piece. So I played rook f to e1 to cut the black king off from defending any of these pawns immediately. a6 was played, rook a to d1 check. The computer said more accurate was to take knight b to d4 right away. However, I thought, well, I want to bring this rook out to this file anyway, so I might as well do it now with tempo. Unfortunately, this also allows the king to retreat to a square further away from the action, which it would like to do anyway. So essentially, that tempo gain is not there. So, like I said, black would like to make this move anyway with his king, so now I'm giving him an ample opportunity to do it. King c8, and knight b to d4. And now I am pretty much ready to be on the attack here, and I've got to find something to do. Either attack something or get this queenside pawn majority rolling. Knight h to g8, and this move I was completely unsure of what the point of it was. I guess with my last move, I think my opponent, I was just trying to centralize this knight, but I think my opponent saw this move as me wanting to bring my knight to this square here on f5 and attack. Possibly a tactical plan with this, or just this pawn might be loose in some variations. It took me a while. That's the only purpose I could see with that move. And unfortunately, that wasn't my plan at all. But this move is actually stronger with the knight here on g8 because of this possibility for a fork. So if knight f5 was played, knight takes d1, rook takes d1, king b7 is forced because otherwise of this fork, and rook e1 This was the variation recommended by Ribka. And I guess now we're threatening here to win this pawn immediately with check on e7. And although the king is getting more safety by avoiding that, both these pawns cannot really be readily protected. And also, the king is actually getting further and further away from the center, which, as more pieces come off the board, is going to want to be closer to the center. So, but that's not what was playing in the game. My plan here was knight g5. And this threatens these two pawns, like I talked about, which is not quite as good for white, but white's still winning in most variations. It's actually, unfortunately, with the setup here, white's pieces are just more coordinated, and it's easier for black to slip up. And black's going to be stuck defending for quite a while before he can attack. And after rook g to f8, I played rook e7, which puts two attackers. So in this position there were a lot of possibilities, and one that I really looked at was rook to d7, and I didn't find all this out until my analysis after the game, but this move is actually not a good defense for black. It looked like the best defense to me on the surface, and I think I would have found this if it was played, but after rook takes d7, we have a couple options. If knight takes d7, then that simply drops the h7 pawn, and it also hits this rook here. So not only that, so now this rook's going to have to move, and the knight gets a chance to retreat back to, so let's say this rook comes out here, then the knight has a chance to come back, and now it's once again attacking this pawn. So that's obviously not good. The other option, just going back here, is to take with the king is actually far, far worse because of this tactic here. Check. Oops. We have discovered check on the king. The king can't grab this knight because it's protected by the other knight, so the king has to move. And after knight takes f8, winning the rook, it's not just winning the exchange because the king cannot come in and capture this piece, because if he does, then, well, the game's just over. The recommended defense here is actually to play h6, which I considered, and I thought, well, this just doesn't do anything. I'll just take the pawn, and now rook d8 can be played. And after this, where does this knight go? So this variation is not possible. And if that was played, it's possible I would have overlooked that. But I think my opponent in this situation actually was starting to get frustrated. Like I said, he was a younger guy. He won his last game, and he was a fairly solid player. But he, like most young players, myself included, they don't play chess to defend. They play chess to attack. And I think he was just getting a little frustrated that either he never really had the chance to attack in the game, not to mention most of his attacks weren't working. So he played a really committal move here, and also a very forcing move, knight g4. Obviously the threat here is rook takes on h2, or I'm sorry, bishop takes on h2 check, which, yes, it wins a pawn, but other than that, it really doesn't do anything. Black's ignoring these threats here, but of course I'm not going to allow this. The best move is just to play h3. Bring this pawn up here and send the knight right back where it came from. However, the reason, and I guess that'll give him the option to still utilize this square for a piece, but like I said, it doesn't really do anything. It's just a pointless check, or if the knight goes there, it doesn't want to be there anyway, because there's no way out if the knight goes down there. So we'll send the knight right back, and I can just pick this pawn right off. I played g3, and I wanted to make as few pawn moves in this region here for king safety as I could. And I wanted to open up the g2 square because the only way to attack this square is with the dark square, is with a bishop. And since black player doesn't have a light square bishop or a queen, the king is going to be completely safe on this square. The drawback, though, of course, is it doesn't kick this knight, and also a lot of my pawns are on dark squares, which does open them up to attack by the bishop, which will probably remain in the game for a little while in many variations. So, although this move is okay, it's probably not the best choice to protect but it does give me an opportunity to. So this knight move was no good because it gives me an opportunity to play a move I wanted to play anyway, which protects my back rank weaknesses. Bishop d6 was played, but I'm going to pick this pawn off anyway, so once again a little bit aimless. And now h6, which I'm not sure if anything better was available here. No, I have to exchange. Rook takes f8. Rook takes f8. And now knight e4, which conveniently attacks this square, or protects this square, which was attacked twice and only defended once by the king. But it also attacks this light squared bishop, or this dark squared bishop, which is a major drawback of bringing it there in the first place. Bishop c5 was played, which adds a third attacker indirectly to this square, but it also gives me the opportunity to take it off. And I don't want to take it off right away, because if I do, after pawn takes, yes, the black pawn structure is even more shattered now, but I'm dropping this pawn here, this pawn may be dropping, and I just want to try and hold my position. Like I said, I have the game's won already. I want to get rid of the minor pieces. I don't want any pawns going if I can avoid it. So I didn't capture yet. Instead, I played, which is not the most accurate move, because I played f4 because it immediately pins this knight. However, I saw that there's no real way for black to exploit that. There's no pawns that can kick this knight, and there's nothing he can do. Not to mention this, if this bishop wants to stay here on this square, I'm just going to get rid of it anyway. So g5 was played, and I went ahead and took this bishop off. B takes c5, and now another great square for my knight, knight e6, which these knights have just been devastating in this game. This knight can conveniently just do everything I want it to do right away. So rook obviously has to move, or I'm going to pull it right off the board. Rook e8, and here I had a bit of a think, and like I said, I was trying to maintain my position as much as possible. I didn't. Yes, I can grab this pawn right away and make a pass pawn, but I didn't want. Let's just take a look at this variation really quick. After something like this, I suppose, I'm still better here. Now I have a pass pawn, but my pawns have been disconnected. In retrospect, I definitely would have taken this, because with the pass pawn, with these two pass pawns, this is just clearly winning. This piece is currently threatened. The black's just lost here. So instead of that, I played f5, because I figured, well, heck, this gives me a pass pawn immediately. This pawn's marching. This knight's protected on a great outpost that it can't be removed from. This looks good, but unfortunately, we're talking about convenient knight moves, and here comes knight e3, which drops this pawn. This guy's gonna have to move, but fortunately for me, I think I kind of lucked out in this game in a sense that even though I overlooked this move, I can defend the position just as easily. Rook d6, and once again, this pawn's dropping, maybe this pawn's dropping. My pieces are getting closer and closer and more dangerous to the black king's position. This knight's protected. And knight takes f5. The pass pawn is dealt with, but rook takes a6, which is the best move. And the problems are not solved for the black player here. King b7 was chosen, which does have the right idea, because let's say black decides to play c4, preventing me from picking that pawn up. After this move, I'm able to get the rooks off, and this pawn is a menace. So that's what I wanted. He didn't allow that with king b7, but simple threat overlook, knight takes c5 check, pulls off that last pawn, checks the king, protects my rook, and 3 connected pass pawns. So the win's getting simpler and simpler from this point. And like I said, I think my opponent was pretty frustrated at this point. I don't really blame him, but he was moving a little more impulsively and getting kind of more upset as his impulsive moves led to worse positions. King b8 was played, and now I play king f2, which weakens king safety. The computer doesn't like it, but I wanted to take these 3 squares away from the rook, so I don't want to give the rook any way to come down onto this back rank and challenge my pawns. So knight e7 was played next, and just kind of a rookie mistake. Well, first of all, this hangs this pawn, but this introduces an immediate pin, which is very bad for black. And I considered that, but I thought, well, heck, there's the pawn. I'll grab it off, and then my problems are solved on the king side, and just makes the win even easier. Rook f8 check. King e2, rook back to e8, and now I finally utilize this pin, rook e6, and this is just over for black now, completely over. So I guess there's still a little bit better fundamentals, but still, things like this pretty obvious, and more frustration is setting in. Even worse, the king is now completely trapped because this rook can't move, because if it does, it'll drop this knight, and this knight can't move because it'll drop the rook. So and the king can't really go anywhere. The king can't come down here to challenge this rook, because, well, one, it's protected by the knight, but this square is also taken away by the knight, and all these squares are taken away by the rook. So these are the squares that the king has to use, and we already decided neither of these pieces can move. Best would have been to try and bring the king over to support this rook. Knight moves, and now we exchange rooks, but unfortunately after that variation it gives me, well, we'll just look into that for a second. So new variation, and let's say something like this. Well, that's no good, it just gives that piece away. So after just as an example, obviously the king can't get back, so obviously moving here was the wrong choice, but you're starting to see now that this pawn's getting really hard to stop, and white can also create a pass pawn on the king side very easily, so just getting closer to the game finish. Okay. Another possibility here after a4 is to play king d8 and a5, rook h8. This looks a little bit bad, but it's actually no problem. White can just sacrifice 2 pawns and win the game. a6, rook takes h2 check, king d3, rook takes b2, and after a7, the rook comes in to try and save the day. It's a little too late, because after rook e6, there's no stopping the white pawn from queening. So just going back, it's not what was played. King c7 was played, a4, and here rook f8 was played, which, like I said, is an inaccuracy. The rook should be coming down here to check, or at the very least coming out here to deal with this a4 pawn. However, rook takes e7 captures, king d6, and I think, like I said, frustration was setting in. My opponent thought that he was getting his knight back, which is why he retreated the rook, but that's not happening. And I played a move which actually doesn't work, and I'll show why. But I had the right idea, so knight e6 was played, and I'm going to give that move both a question mark and an exclamation mark because if my opponent plays here rook ag8, the black king is threatening to win this rook, and I can't retreat to a square and protect the knight, so black is actually getting the knight back here. My idea was, after knight e6, if king takes e7, knight takes f8, king takes f8, and now the black king is too far away to stop queening. So just going back, the correct move, instead of knight e6, would have been just simply to play the knight out to d7 with the same idea. And from here, if black comes out, white can still hold the knight, dropping 2 pawns, but the knight is held onto, and this pawn will probably queen. So I was considered this, and I think this is a sign of improvement because I never would have even considered this in the past. The best move here, actually, which I didn't see even though I was looking for it, is just knight e5, and the reason is, well, king can't take here, so if it takes here, we got fork, and you know, wherever the king goes, more material is lost. So that would have been a cool combination. Knight e6, rook a8, which fortunately saves me because once again I'll go with the same idea. Knight c7, rook takes a4, rook g7, and like I said, I think frustration was setting in here because now the black player was sure he wasn't getting this knight back, and he quickly played rook a7, and after knight b5 check, the black player resigned. I'd like to thank you all once again for checking out my second USFC rated tournament game. Feel free to leave comments, questions, improvements, anything like that on YouTube. And looking forward to my next game coming up hopefully again this Thursday. So see you soon.